Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
Yo, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 122 of our year-long series that we have titled Devoted, as we are journeying through the entire Bible from cover to cover. Find ourselves this week in the book of First Chronicles, bringing it to a conclusion. And I am excited to be back again, joined by my wife, Victoria, as we make our way almost towards the end.
Yeah.
I have a few more chapters here over the next couple of days to finish First Chronicles, but we pick up here at chapter 21, left off last with kind of a couple conquests of David, really kind of seeing God's favor on him specifically as he conquered everybody from Ammonites to Syrians, Arameans to Philistines to giants, everything in between. Really, we kind of see him do that. But pick up here in chapter 21 with essentially, interestingly enough, sin. Right?
Yeah.
Which I think, based off the way we left yesterday's conversation, is interesting. They do point this out.
Exactly.
Kind of what happens here, because they have, for the most part, given us a scrubbed down version of David's life that really just kind of points out his good. So what you find was interesting here in chapter 21, as we get a story that kind of tells of a sin that ultimately costs a lot of people their lives.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that although he includes it, I think it was really funny how this author starts this off. Did you think it was interesting too? Yeah. I think it was interesting in verse 1. It says, "Then Satan," I feel like it's real Adam and Eve, like Satan made me do it.
Yeah.
Like, then Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. And yeah, Second Samuel just does it. Second Samuel chapter 24 doesn't quite say it the same way. It's kind of like, David was incited to do this on his own. It wasn't like this whole Satan that showed up. So I think it was interesting that that's how we start the story off. They're like, hold on, wait a minute. David's a good guy. Satan just got to him.
Yeah, I'm about to ask kind of why you thought that it is different. It is one of the things that, my study Bible does point out, is that difference between those two accounts. And as you said, one is more like, God stirs up David, and it's like Satan stirs up David. And it's like, okay, so who was it? Kind of thing. But the obvious answer is essentially both, right? Like, Satan does not do anything without the permission, essentially, or at least the allowance, I should say, of God. And we'll see that later, even with like Job and some other stories we'll get to. But I think it's funny that you said, from the chronicler's perspective, it's like, let's deflect and point the attention and the blame elsewhere, because it's not David's fault per se, but it was that Satan did this. But I don't know, I'm so curious, because either way, I don't know if you have a thought on this, so I'm putting you on the spot here, and I acknowledge that. I'm curious, like, why God would allow that. Like, why would this be part of his plan? Like, there's some other things, like David and Bathsheba, as terrible as that is, Solomon comes from that marriage, right? And so, like, there's some he didn't have to be that way, but there's some like in the looking back we can kind of go, well, Solomon and of course the lineage that comes thereafter like makes sense as to why something so terrible had to happen in that case. I'm really curious, like when I read this story, it's hard for me to see the why and understand like why God would do this for David specifically. I don't know, any thoughts that you had on that? Anything come to mind of like, if this is kind of the God's allowing, you know, for Satan to do this, why? Like, why? What was the end purpose or end goal?
Yeah, I had two different thoughts of maybe why it might be. The first one, I think, I pointed out when we were reading in First Samuel initially was, maybe Second Samuel at this point. I'm sorry, Second Samuel initially, that maybe this was a reason for the Lord to teach David once again his like law and the things that he should have been doing. Because I remember previously I mentioned that like when you were to go out and take a census, you were also supposed to take a tithe from the people, and that tithe was supposed to go to the Lord's temple. And so it was like, if you're going to count how many you are, all the glory goes back to the Lord, right? And do it with the purpose of serving the Lord, which he didn't do, which maybe this was brought up kind of like the whole like Uzzah and the cart and, you know, him dying because they brought the Ark of the Covenant in the wrong way. Like a teaching of David, his laws. Like, let me teach you, David, like, this isn't how you're supposed to go about this. So let me make it clear that like you missed something here, right? And so in case you or Solomon or whoever does this again, you guys don't forget this part of my law. So that was one of my thoughts. The other thought was maybe just to humble David and the people of Israel, right? Like maybe after all these wars, and I don't know if this is the right one, because I feel like at this point David's been humbled by his son and like a few other things that has happened. So like maybe, but who knows what his like heart posture was and his mindset was at this time. But maybe like since he had rest, he got comfortable, you know, he feeling some type of way about his kingdom, that like maybe this was a way to like humble Israel and David by saying like, hey, I'm still in control here. Like, this is not you, this is me, and I can take away as many as I'd like, you know, at the drop of a dime. And even the fact that like in verse 16, when David lifted his eyes and saw the angel of the Lord standing between earth and heaven, and in his hand drawn a sword stretched over Jerusalem. To me, this was interesting because I don't know how many times it has ever said that David has like seen a vision of an angel or the Lord. You know what I'm saying? And so like the fact that the Lord even allowed him to see this angel was significant to me, of like, oh yeah, he had like opened his eyes, kind of like with the Elisha thing, right? Like he opened his eyes and allowed him to see this angel, like to even just remind him like, no, there's this divine thing that's happening all the time. Like this is these people are in my control. Like my angels are the true army, right? Like, and with one of my angels, I can wipe y'all all out. And so I don't know. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think both of those could make sense, and you know, I don't know. We'll never know the answer,
right?
But it was just a question of something I've thought. I mean, I think some of the other, in a lot of ways, I think we also, things that happen that are written in scripture are also for the rest of us to learn from too, right? And that perhaps there's a part of me that comes away, especially even from this perspective, when you know Chronicles is kind of brushed over some of the other stuff in David's life, that there's a part of me that also comes away with like, man, like just don't ever get too comfortable, like in just believing that like you've done enough, right? And you've got it figured out, because I think like even a man after God's own heart is susceptible to influence of the enemy. You know what I'm saying? Like kind of thing that like just don't ever feel like you've made it, right? Or that you are no longer open to influence or whatever the case may be to the enemy. And yeah, I wonder if there's even some of that like I didn't think the enemy could get to me like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's just to remind the rest of us that like, yeah, even when you think you've done it well, you've done it all, that there's still that chance, you know? Yeah. So again, I don't know, maybe it wasn't necessarily for him or for them. It was just for us to know.
Yeah.
You know, thousands of years later to be reminded that like, yeah, we can still be open. The enemy can still sneak in and deceive us and lead us astray if we're not careful.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. But it was something I thought was interesting. We talked a little bit about Joab yesterday. It was interesting that Joab like clearly knew this wasn't the way to go and he should do this, right? And he kind of, obviously the king overruled him, David did, but like, you know, he was kind of like, nah, this is not good, to the point where he even leaves out some of them. He doesn't count Benjamin or the Levites because he's just like,
I can't do this.
Yeah, this is not right. And so like I said, very interesting specifically that Joab kind of does see that as wrong. But yeah, then he gives him these three. We've talked about this story before, so it's not necessarily a whole lot of new here, but he does give him the three options. David picks the one that's like, I don't want to be at the hands of my enemies, essentially. Which, again, I thought was a little selfish because it was just kind of like, you know, 70,000 plus people or whatever the number was going to die ultimately because of your choice. But as you said, he sees the angel, he repents, and then he gets instructions to essentially offer the sacrifice to end the plague. Anything that was interesting here into 21 before we get into 22?
Yeah, I mean, I just love it. You know me, I get giddy about this stuff where like the Lord gives us insight to like his angels and what they're up to and what he's doing. And so like even just in verse 27, like Lord commanded the angel and he put his sword back into its sheath. Like just that detail of like he had this sword and he just put it back in his sheath. It's kind of like, yo, I don't need no Marvel. Like this is good.
That's hilarious.
This is real good.
Yeah.
This is real good right here. Like just to try and envision this myself of just the might of the Lord, because like I said, in one chapter we're getting how kind and generous and gracious the Lord is, but just this reminder, like I'm mighty too.
Yeah.
You know, like don't forget, like one of my angels can take all y'all out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. One thing I thought was interesting was just like Ornan, his like place in this. I just had this like imagery of him just, you know, on the threshing floor and like minding his own business and not even realizing that he was like this close to death. Yeah. Right? Because like legit, the angel of the Lord is making his way through, and this is where he gets stopped. Like, he gets stopped right here at his threshing floor, like where, you know, it's like enough, and it's like, oh, okay. And I just feel like he's probably just minding his own business, because even when they come to him, right, like his like servants or his sons or somebody goes running and hiding. And it's like he was on the threshing floor. His 4 sons, in verse 20. You know, were with him hid when they saw the angel, right? Like, just like he's like threshing wheat, and he just comes out, and he's just like, "Oh, son, there's an angel." Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like it's just, I don't know, it's just so interesting to me to just think of how, I don't know, I think when I was talking like how close we could be, you know, but literally it's just like God stops it, and just like says, "Nope, enough. I'm stopping at you." Right. For no reason, nothing that Ornan did. He didn't do anything special. He was just minding his own business. But like, it was up to God to kind of stop him at that point. And so, I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. Like, I could see a movie scene type of thing, right? Where like, there's just destruction going and it just stops like in the face of somebody, you know? It's just like right there at that point. But
that is.
Yeah, and then, you know, I always have to bring up, because this is just, it's one of my favorite verses, particularly in 2 Samuel, but again here in 1 Chronicles, where, you know, God again instructs David to offer this sacrifice. He has to do it there at Ornan's threshing floor. Ornan's like, yo, you the king, bro. Like,
take what you need.
Whatever you say, like, whatever you need, it's yours. Like, you can have it. And David's like, no, like, I will not, you know, offer unto you or unto God, like, what cost me nothing, essentially, right? Which is kind of the version I have, but that, like, verse 24, no, I insist on paying full price, for I will not take for the Lord what belongs to you or offer burnt offerings. So that cost me nothing. Right? Like, I know, I just love that our offerings, our sacrifices, or whatever, our gifts to the Lord can't, you know, they gotta cost us something. Like, it ought to cost us something, I should say. It should be a sacrifice. And if it doesn't cost us anything, then we probably should reflect on that. Specifically.
It reminds me of the kids who sometimes they get this like fervor to like give people stuff. And like, oh, we should give toys away to like the kids in the neighborhood, and they go and try and find like all their broken toys.
And
I'm like, no, if you go give them toys to the fucking neighborhood, you can go in your piggy bank. You can go to the store and buy somebody some toys, and not just give them the things that you're not even thinking about.
You know how that feels, man. You know, I've been given some things in my life that I was like, it's not a gift, it's just something you don't want.
It's something you don't want anymore.
Like, hey, I got this free thing. At this place I was at.
It was giving out free stuff.
I thought you might want it. But it's really, you didn't want it.
You want it.
And there's a good it's funny you said this last thing on this. There's a good Southwest commercial that's out like this right now, where like this couple comes to the door with this like gift, and they're joking about the gift because it's like this bread maker, and they were just like, yeah, like this stupid bread maker, like, you know, what do they say, like one bread maker like re-gift and ready to go or something like that, right? And he was like, man, I don't even know who got us this stupid thing. And then like the ring doorbells, like, I got you that stupid thing, right? And it was like the guy that they were trying to give this gift back to gave them the gift, and so it's just like oh, re-gifting, right? Like that ain't cost you nothing, and you was about to just give it away like it was a gift. But worse, you giving it back to the person that bought it for you, which is even worse, right? Like that is literally, that is literally what our life with God is like. Like God is like, I gave that to you. I gave that to you. I gave that to you, and you gonna try to? It didn't even cost me nothing. You gonna turn around and just try to give it back? Like that was mine. This threshing floor, this is my threshing floor. This stuff that Ornan, I gave Ornan that. Like, don't be trying to re-gift Ornan stuff to me. Like, it's mine.
That's funny.
I don't know.
No, that's crazy.
It's a good commercial though. You should.
It sounds funny.
But like I said, I just love that idea. I think it's worth the challenge, man.
Yeah, it is.
Obviously, in personal life, there's great things, right? Like we should be kind to one another and do things that actually cost us something, but particularly to the Lord.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think we can get in trouble when our perspective is we only want to offer to Him. That's what's convenient, or you know, does it really cost us much, right? Like, I know I'm still on this point here, but just not even just like financial cost. I think about just like time and energy.
That part, yeah.
Right? Like, how often are we only willing to do for God that which fits in our schedule? You mean, or in our comfort zone?
I say that we're comfortable with doing. Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah, God, if it's this, I got you.
Yeah.
If you ask me to do anything outside of that, no, you know what I'm saying?
I'm gonna procrastinate on it. Yeah. I'm gonna ask you 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Before I even try to do it.
Yeah, I gotta give you. I mean, we talked about it yesterday, right? It might cost me sleep to spend some time with you. You know, it might cost me having to get up and actually get dressed to go somewhere, you know, when I don't really want to. It might cost me being in a place and space that smells or is dirty or has germs, you know. It might cost me to, like, these are some of the things that I don't really want to do, but my service to you costs me that. Yeah. You know, my offering to you. So, yeah, I don't know. I just think it's a good point to sit on and reflect on and encourage all of us to consider. But
yeah, for sure.
That was just chapter 21. Chapter 22.
Moving on.
Very interesting. David prepares for the temple. And I will say that for me, as I was reading this, this felt like different than 2 Samuel, right?
Did.
Like, and even 1 Kings. This was like the first time I felt like, okay, this is new from some of what we read before. What jumped out to you in chapter 22?
Yeah, this verse of, like you said, it's different and new, because in verse 5, he was like, my son Solomon is young and inexperienced. The house for the Lord to be built should be exceedingly magnificent, of fame and glory throughout all the lands. I will therefore make preparation for it. And he's like taking it upon himself, like, I will make preparation for the Lord. Because like I think this is pivotal for me, because the Lord told David, no, you can't be the one to build it. David could have been like, okay, Lord, and sat around for Solomon to just do it, right? And just waited, be like, okay, it's not gonna be in my lifetime, you know. My son's gonna do it. But like, he still, with a joyful heart, got up and started making preparations just to make sure that it was done right. Yeah. Like, and did what he could do. Yeah. Like, did what he was allowed to do. Yeah. And so I do love that heart of him. That number one, he wanted his son to be successful, but and started to do things. And as a parent, that just speaks to me, right? Like, preparing his son to be successful in this project. But two, he wanted to make sure that, like, whatever his son did for the Lord, it was done right. Yeah. You know, and that he had the provision for it.
Yeah, that's good. It reminds me a little bit of, we talked about this in the end of Deuteronomy, because it reminds me a little bit of how Moses, who knew he wasn't going to see the promised land, but he found that out years before, and he still served and led well, and trained up Joshua and invested in him, and made sure Joshua and the Israelites were prepared to go into that promise. Right? Did. Like, he didn't give up and say, well, I'm not gonna get the promise, so y'all figured it out.
Good luck.
Yeah, y'all figured it out. Y'all the reason I can't go anyway, right? We already knew that's what his thought.
He was salty.
His belief was it was their fault. So
he was salty.
Like, he could have just been like, all right, man, y'all figured it out. But instead, he stayed faithful, and he kept, you know, teaching and leading and judging. And I think, to your point, David could have left that responsibility for Solomon, or even can just personalize a little bit more. Like, as you said, even from a parental standpoint, I mean, he could have just enjoyed the fruits of his labor. Like, there's a lot of like gold and silver and all sorts of stuff here that, like, what if he just said, well, I mean, I worked for this, I fought for this, I wanna live it up and enjoy those things, right? But like, he invested and left something for his legacy. And I think that's something that, you know, it is a challenge, right? Because I could spend up all my money today, live my life, enjoy what we got now, and then die, and my kids got to start all over and build their own up, you know. And not even just for our kids, but even for just the faith and for the church. Like, what are we doing now to prepare the way, to invest, you know, and that those that'll come after, and making sure that they're set up well, not just for success, but to glorify God. That's what this was about, right? Like, it was to glorify God. He's like, I want to make sure y'all glorify God right. Like, I want to make sure God gets the proper glory that he is due. So let me leave this behind for you.
Yeah. And I love that you just said that part, because he even tells them in verses 12 and 13 here that, like, listen, be careful to observe the statutes of the rules of the Lord, you know, that was commanded by Moses of Israel. Like, then you will prosper. Like, like, you have to still not only just take this gold and silver and bronze for this temple, but like what came even before them was like, yeah, your heart needs to be for God.
Yeah.
Like, do not forget that, like, that you are going to be charged over Israel, and you need to keep the word of the Lord.
Yeah.
I feel like I think that was significant that even came before verse 14 that talked about, he said, with great pains I provided the house of the Lord, you know, all this gold and silver and bronze and iron that they have weighed out. So
yeah, it's good. Okay. Anything else here in 22?
Yeah. I just don't know how many times they have to say it. From Moses to Joshua to the judges, and you know, how many times that they say, like, keep your mind and heart on the Lord. Follow his commandments.
Yeah.
And to see eventually that Solomon starts off good.
Yeah.
But loses and forgets that instruction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's probably why they have to keep saying it.
Right.
Right? You say you don't know each other to keep saying it. Probably until they actually do it. Keep saying it until somebody actually does it. Which is good. But well, we start a section here that starts in chapter 23. We won't really kind of get through all of it, just because it kind of continues into tomorrow's reading. But not only does David kind of prepare the people for the temple, like in a kind of resource material way, right, with some of the things to actually build the temple, but he actually starts to prepare them also for what it will take to kind of upkeep and serve, you know, to minister, like to actually like be in the temple.
Yeah.
By bringing back in the Levites and kind of starting to give them some different assignments. What would you find was interesting here in 23, just as we start this conversation about the Levites?
Yeah, I think this is like what you said with this previous chapter 22, like this seems different, right? Like this was like new stuff that we're seeing here.
Yeah.
When most of, you know, it's been repetitive, but like here, I really do like love it. There was organization to this stuff. Like you can really see, and this is what I love when I see like the administration and the warriors, and they give all the names of all these people. Like this is really like how the kingdom thrived and like how they did things, and there was order to it. And so I do love this. But one of the things that pointed out to me that struck me when I saw it was normally back when they were given like the genealogy of like Aaron and Moses, sometimes they'd say what Aaron's sons were. They'd leave out who Moses' sons were. And we kept on asking, like, well, what happened to them? Like, are they around? Like, did they just fall off? Like, but here we are in verse 15. We see that or 14 and 15, they see that like Moses' sons were named, they were just part of the Levites now. Yeah. And because they were Levites, right? Aaron and Moses came from the tribe of Levi. Yeah. And so they were just among the Levites, and Gershom and Eleazar. And yeah, I think it's interesting to see them.
Yeah, I did think that was interesting because you said we do not hear from them. It was one of the conversations you said we were having was like, where is Moses? Or at least his sons, where are they? So yeah, I do think it's very interesting that this time through, like, they are not only mentioning them, it means that somebody had to keep track, you know, kind of their lineage. And so yeah, I thought that did jump out to me. I was like, oh, so Moses did have some sons that are serving, you know, kind of in some way. So yeah, now obviously this also just kind of gives us, these are just their descendants, right? And just kind of giving us their lineage all together. But it is from this family that ultimately David is going to establish those that will serve, you know, in the temple in these different roles. But yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily get too much into all of the different roles because we'll kind of break those down over the next couple of days or the next day or so. But like, yeah, was there anything else that just jumped out to you about kind of the organization of it, or even just anything else here in 23 that you thought was particularly significant?
Yeah, one of the things was that in verse 26, he was like, the Levites no longer need to carry the tabernacle or any of the things for its service, because like the Lord had given them rest and stuff. And so I do just think it is like honing in on their duties at the temple, that we're not moving around anymore, like, you know, because they did have order. There was instruction on who was supposed to pick up what part of the tabernacle and move it to certain places, and just to see that like he has organized them again and given them their duties and modified it, and even in a way that like these are instructions and it's not requiring us to pick up and move anything anymore. Like this is going to be a permanent house, and just establishing that.
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it shows, and it's one of the things that I kind of look forward to discussing as we looked at all the different roles kind of going forward. But like, it shows to me that there's room for like the adjustment and application of kind of God's law in some ways, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, be very clear. We talked about it earlier this week, right? Know what God says, do it the way he tells you to do it, right? If there's a right way, do it the right way. But I think it shows that like David's like, all right, we understood the principle of the law, the spirit of the law, the heart of it, which was for the Levites to serve in this role, to serve, like the reason they weren't given a portion or a land is because God is their portion, essentially, right? And they have to serve. So we know that to be true. That's the heart of it. The reality is the specific application of moving this tabernacle from place to place, or whatever the case may be, we're replacing that with a temple. So can we apply the same spirit, you know, and understanding to a new role, a more modern and contemporary and like relevant role, you know? And I think like we see that the reality is we don't, as Christians today, worship God in a temple. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not, it would be silly for us to try to literally go and live in the way that they've called us to, because there's just things that are different, right? One, we're not Jewish. Two, God don't live in a temple. Three, that temple don't exist right now. Like there's so many things that like if we tried to do it exactly as this, like it would just kind of be silly.
Because we're at the temple now.
Right. And so I think it's interesting to see, as you say, that like modern application of the same spirit of that law or that instruction played out in something that makes more sense for the context and where they were at that time. I think, again, just kind of fast forwarding and seeing different ways that we can kind of also apply context in spirit and understanding of who God is to kind of what he expects of us.
Yeah, so good. So good. I like it. Yeah. That's all I had.
Yeah. Well, so we'll talk more about the role specifically tomorrow and some of what that looks like. But as it stands now, David again is just kind of preparing the way for Solomon and for the people of Israel, not just in preparing them in materials, but also in ministry and expectations there and roles. And so we'll see more of that tomorrow. But pick up in chapter 24 and continue to bring First Chronicles to a conclusion. But until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.